First of all, we would like to get your introduction.
My name is Emmeline Smith. I'm a lecturer at the University of Glasgow. This is part of the Scottish Centre for Crime and Justice Research. This is in Scotland, in the UK. So it's very cold at the moment. And I'm a criminologist. I'm a lecturer in criminology. I focus on transnational crime and the trafficking of cultural and natural resources.
Since you are exploring criminology issues, how do you define these topics in general? Because it's a new subject for us.
Yes, absolutely. Criminology hasn't really penetrated in Nepali academics yet, and hopefully that'll be obviously soon. A criminologist is interested in how and why criminal and harmful behaviors happen. And so for me personally, my research has focused on the trafficking of cultural and natural resources. So why this happens and how it happens, who is involved, what are their practices, how do they justify this? And ultimately, of course, also, what are the loopholes in international legislation so that we can counter these practices?
Okay. How long have you been involved with Nepal and Nepali heritage? I mean, creating awareness on it?
Nepal always had a special place in my heart. I visited here a couple of years ago, and I was doing my PhD in Hong Kong on the trade and cultural heritage there. And while I was working there, I noticed that there were a lot of Nepali objects also that came on the market there. So it piqued my interest, right, as a source country, as well as perhaps a market country as well. So 2 years ago, we got some funding from the Scottish Government Global Challenges Research Fund to assist Nepali efforts in countering the trafficking of cultural heritage here, and to look into how this happens, who is involved, and what we can do about it.
You are over with the fact of stolen artifacts of Nepal in the recovery campaign, right? What do you think the reason behind the delay in receiving these important information of artifacts that has been stolen 50 years ago? What may be the reason behind it?
Well, Nepal heritage has been disappearing since the 1960s and 70s. When Nepal first opened up, there were a lot of people that came from North America and from Europe that came here to find enlightenment, of course. And in the process, they really adored these statues. Unfortunately, they also wanted to bring them home. And this is when a lot of large European and North American collections first started. This happened all across the 1970s, 1980s, this continued. And so what we now see in the market is this reckoning for, let's say, decolonization, where people are aware that these objects have problematic pasts. And so they want to do something about it in a museum or in a private collection. You see now more provenance research, more questions, critical questions being asked about how these objects came to be out of Nepal. But of course, all of the objects that are out of Nepal or that were exported after the 1956 law are illegal. And so unfortunately, they would have to be returned, ideally. Right. So in the market now, we see this reckoning, and hopefully we can continue asking these critical questions and build a market for cultural objects that is ethical and transparent. Because until now, it's been built on, a lack of due diligence and a lack of transparency, and that should be changed.
Right. As you know, the recent incident of recovery, handovering some of images of Nepal, has been praised as the biggest achievement, whereas the whole story behind how and who were involved in stealing these artifacts has been hidden. Since you are a lecturer on criminology, don't you think that we are providing impunity to these culprits? What do you think?
I think that, as I said, the market has definitely been based on a lack of transparency and due diligence. But I think there's also some good work being done by auction houses, by museums, and by collectors in order to question these practices. But the most important thing that is happening now is that civil society, that the public is asking these questions. When you're going to a museum now, ask yourself, how did these objects came here? How were they purchased? When were they purchased? Is it legal and ethical for them to be here? That happens not only in Nepal, but all over the world. And that is incredibly important because it means that the market also needs to scrutinize itself more. So I think hopefully in the long run, we can hold those that were responsible accountable. And that happens with a lot of big court cases, like for example in India, as well as in the US, of course, with renowned art dealers. That also puts pressure on the market to say, you know what, I think I need to look at my practices more to be a more ethical collector or a more ethical auction house or even dealer.
So I just would like to know your visit. I mean, what's the purpose behind this time visit to Nepal?
Well, the project that I mentioned earlier was coming to an end, and we've been working really hard with stakeholders from all walks of life that are involved in the protection and the repatriation of cultural heritage. But as a criminologist, you also speak to people that are involved in the harmful or criminal side of these things. So I've spoken to all kinds of actors involved in this practice. And what became clear is that we need a strategy in order to protect Nepal's cultural heritage and to repatriate it. What happens when objects come back? How can we, effectuate a better policy of making them come back? But also, what happens before they are stolen? How can we better protect Nepal's objects? And we need efforts both within the country as well as outside of Nepal in order to pressure the market to scrutinize itself more. So when the borders opened, of course, I was very excited to come back to Nepal and finish this project successfully. And part of that was providing training and giving awareness to people. So we provided a couple of training sessions here in Kathmandu as well as in Dolpa in order to raise awareness and around protecting cultural heritage and how to inventory cultural heritage. Because as you know, Nepal's heritage is so incredibly diverse and so vast, but unfortunately very poorly documented. There is no documentation. And so when things get stolen, the first question that international police will always ask is, do you have any evidence that it was yours, that it was here, that it was stolen? And unfortunately, often we don't. So we have these amazing books that were documented by art historians in the 1970s and by other, passionate visitors like Jürgen Schick and Lengsing Bangdel. And we have inventories that have started over the years by the Department of Archaeology and by other stakeholders. But unfortunately, they were not integrated and they don't cover the whole of Nepal. So until that happens, until we have a system where everything is inventorized, we still need to protect the heritage. And it means that I wanted to travel to Dolpa to make people aware of how they can even take photos, clear photos that could serve as evidence when things get stolen.
One more concern, why do you choose Upper Dolpo to create such awareness? I mean, any events, any incidents were there, or why did you choose Upper Dolpo?
I went to Lower Dolpa, I went to Phoksundo, and Rinpoche there has been fighting for the protection of cultural heritage for a really long time there. And he and I became acquainted, and he spoke to me about the recent thefts that have happened in Dolpo. Unfortunately, a couple of years ago, some statues have been stolen, but actually, when I speak to people there, everyone has a story about art theft. That happens in Kathmandu, of course. Everyone knows someone that had something stolen. I didn't expect it to also happen in Dolpo. But unfortunately, items were stolen over the years. They've had regular thefts happen. And of course, this is a problem of location. Dolpo is a very remote area in the lower Himalayas. The border between Tibet and China and Nepal is open there. The border with India is open. So Nepal becomes somewhat of a transit country through which people take what they can get, and cultural heritage is one of these commodities that is often stolen. However, we can also make a lot of changes there. Right. So when I traveled there, we did a training session with a range of stakeholders, and it was so fantastic to see the younger generation being so very excited to protect their own heritage and get involved in this. This is a very important topic for a lot of the younger generation. They don't stand for this. They say, this is our cultural heritage and I want it back. And this is where it's different from other cultural heritage objects that are abroad. Nepal's heritage is a living heritage. It's continuously used every day. So this isn't something from the past, and this isn't a past problem. It happens every day. The theft, the looting is still ongoing, and you definitely see that in Dolpo. So that's why I wanted to go there. And the people were wonderful. They were very welcoming, but the stories that they told me were heartbreaking. When objects disappear, it's not just an object or a god that disappears. It's also the intangible heritage around it that disappears, right? So the rituals, the practices, the stories, the food, the music, and of course, the worshiping continues. The worshiping of that god or that religion continues, but it's not the same because you don't have the visual representation of the deity anymore. And this is why it's so important that we get the murtis back. But not only the murtis, when I talk about cultural heritage, I'm also talking about archaeological, architectural features. I'm talking about everything that realistically just belongs in Nepal and is Nepali. So it has to be given back by the market.
When you were there, did you ask about the documentation process and what's going on, and did you give any idea regarding the process?
Yeah, so we did a training session, but unfortunately, because of its remote location, there are practical issues that you don't have in the big city, right? For example, there is not a lot of electricity during the day. There is not a lot of paper or pens around. So you have to come up with creative solutions. What is fortunate is that everyone has a smartphone nowadays, right? So everyone can at least take a picture. And pictures are very, very important in the process of identification and evidence, because it means that even if we have, 20 of the same Buddhas or 20 of the same Garuda statues, we can at least distinguish some very specific differences, but we can only do that if we have a photo. There are many, many people who have stories about family murtis or like family objects that were stolen over the years, and they can vividly remember them, but they were stolen 30 years ago. And even with their very vivid descriptions, it would be very difficult to get them back, right? So if we only have photographic evidence, I'd be very happy. But we also provided the school as well as the local chairman and some other stakeholders with a USB in order to at least record whatever they could. And sometimes it can be, a drawing, sometimes it can be a short description, but at least we have some sort of proof.
Thank you. At last, I just would like to ask you, there is a kind of international campaign to locate the stolen heritage for the recovery process, How do you see and what do you like to comment on this awareness campaign that's going on internationally?
I think it's fantastic that these questions are finally being asked. And it's also fantastic that there's a platform for actions like the Nepal Heritage Recovery Campaign to finally be given a voice in these kinds of discussions, right? You can see what fantastic work they have done over the past couple of months. But this is a combined effort of individuals that have been working on this for a very long time already. What you need is global awareness for people, as I said, to walk into these museums and say, we don't want to walk around museums anymore that are filled with stolen and looted art. But instead, we want to know about these problematic histories and we want to address them. What is a museum really for? It's to educate the people, right? But who are the people really? Up until now, museums have been for quite a select few people, and people had to travel a long distance to see their own heritage. That's not okay anymore. We're in 2021. Instead, you see that with the use of social media, it's fantastic to see how people use that to connect with each other, not only in Nepal, but also Nepali expats, as well as other people outside of Nepal. They get really passionate about repatriating these objects. And that happens all over the world. So it doesn't only happen in Nepal. But what I think is really important here is that we have a very defined period of looting. This didn't happen 100, 200 years ago because of colonization or whatever else. It happened 40 years ago. It happened pretty recently.
Right.
And we can still connect the pieces, the objects that were looted, to the communities. We can still connect them to the people that live there and the stories that they have. That's why it's so important that these objects are brought back. So I'm very excited that this new generation is picking up on this and is tweeting all about it. And I hope that this only spreads, because then my job hopefully becomes, my job wouldn't be important anymore. And instead there would be, a lot of Nepali criminologists who are looking into these issues and getting these objects back.
Thank you, Dr. Amin.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.